Today we're going to be talking about archives, the physical version, not the vast and wonderful resources on the internet. I have decided to make it a little bit more about the actions of going to an archive and also the thought process behind the research process. This is because all archives are different, and we could spend a long time looking at one particular archive and all the different types of documents that are in it, but that may actually be of no use to you whatsoever. You may end up looking at something in a maritime archive. You might want to go and look at something to do with transport, and all of the actual documents within the archives, they're going to vary wildly. The approach, how you approach archival research and how you approach setting up an appointment and going to the archives and the sort of things that you'll need to know in order to do that, they are a lot more universal. So that's how we're going to focus on today. And there'll be a little bit of sort of more specific document bits, but I think I may have saturated you with research guides and various topics and things that were out there yesterday. So we're going to keep it a little bit more tightly focused today. So I'm just going to see if I can share my screen and get this to work. Right, so we want to share this one. But we actually want to share that one because, as I found out yesterday, it's going to turn into that one when I turn it into a PowerPoint presentation, hopefully. There we go. Okay, so bear with me 1 second. I really did. What today is decided, what this is showing me is that I need 3 screens. There we go. So, can you see my slideshow and not my notes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Sort of spoiling the mystery, but I do have some of this written down. So here we go. Yeah, sessions 3 and 4, we're going to look all about archives. It's going to follow a similar format in that I'm going to talk at you for a little bit, then we're going to have an activity and a little bit more talking, and then a tea break, hopefully, which I'm sure will be the highlight of the afternoon. And then we're going to come back. The first activity is going to be a group activity. The second activity is going to be a personal activity. So just to plant that seed in your head, if you could start thinking as we start to go through this of what your personal areas of research interests relating to the project might be. So hopefully by the end of the second session, you might start formulating, this is an area that I have a personal interest in, and this could relate to the project. How? Just start sort of putting those cogs in motion at the back of the brain. Okay, so first session, we're going to talk about where to find out about your local archives and record offices, how to arrange an appointment, what to bring and what not to bring, and a little bit about what you're likely to find there. But as I said, that will vary wildly depending on the type of archive that you are visiting. Some are very broad, some are very specific, and will only, as I was talking to Keith about yesterday, you're going to go to the National Railway Museum. It's going to be a fairly small amount of sort of narrow topic range that you're going to be looking at there. Okay, so what is an archive? How do I introduce to this? So the internet provided this definition for me. It's very accurate. An archive is an accumulation of historical records in any media or the physical facility in which they are located. They contain primary source documents that have accumulated over the course of an individual or organisation's lifetime and are kept to show the function of that person or organisation. I thought that's a really good definition. Quite often with a local archive, as I put at the bottom, they amass their collections by donation. So rather than just being a person or an organisation, they cover a very broad range of people and organisations. However, they can do so in quite a haphazard way. So it may be that you have lots and lots of information relating to that estate over there because they decided they didn't want to keep their own records and they gave them all to the archive 20 years ago. However, that part of the city, that manorial estate has their own archivist. They keep everything in-house and they haven't donated it. So if you're looking into certain areas, there can be a big disparity between what you might expect to find and what you do find. You might come out and be like, I've got more than I could possibly handle, or I've got nothing. It really depends, and there isn't always a rhyme or reason to it. Also, it often depends on what has survived. Paper records are prone to flood damage, fire, people accidentally throwing a box out when they shouldn't have. Obviously, there's a lot of issues around military records from the First World War, a lot of comprehensive record keeping, but quite a lot of that has been lost and damaged in various moving between archive offices and fire events and things. You sometimes see this if anybody is sad like me who quite likes Who Do You Think You Are. You'll quite often find that they know that somebody served in a certain regiment, but there are no records left of that at all. And that is quite common when we're dealing with pre-digital record keeping. National archives will also, much like national museums, sometimes purchase documents that are at risk of falling out of the public domain. Old maps and documents relating to title deeds, laws, things like that. They will sometimes raise funds to purchase those rather than there is legal guidance and laws around things leaving the country. This counts for any historic artifact that if something's going to leave the country, that museums and archives are offered the opportunity to raise the purchase price prior to it going to a bidder overseas, if I remember rightly from my university public archaeology modules. So yeah, there we go. So the first thing you would do if you were going to conduct some archival research is that you will need to find your archives. I had a quick Google and I found some that I thought would be relevant to the project. So you've got you've got the Northumberland Archives. You've also got a record office in Berwick. We spoke yesterday, Carol, and name has fallen out the side of my head. Becky, there we go. Sorry, about the Scottish Borders Archive, and I believe you mentioned there might be another local archive in the Borders area, if I remember that right.
The Hawick Heritage Hub.
The Heritage Hub. That was, yes. There we go. So yeah, they're not always the most obvious name either, as these places are outsourced to third-party organisations that are not the council. Sometimes they're outsourced to charities or private organisations now, so that they can access different types of funding. And so I know that in Nottingham now, our website for our archives isn't Nottinghamshire County Council Archives, it's Inspire. Which is the same as the people who also run our libraries now. So it's not necessarily always intuitive. Again, as we spoke about yesterday, you've got National Records of Scotland, National Archives at Kew, and also the British Library. They also hold a lot of maps and manuscripts and old title deeds and things like that that have landed in their collections. So we really could do better about having a centralised catalogue between some of our national institutions, but at the moment it is often a case of having to trawl through all of them just to make sure you haven't missed something that's in a counterintuitive place. So when you're considering your archives, you need to do a little bit of background research. Often going to an archive can be quite a time-consuming process. So, unless you happen to live round the corner, I literally do live round the corner from the Nottinghamshire Archives, but if you were going down to London to view some documents, or if you were going to go to somewhere that was a specialist, maritime or railway, military repository, then you really want to make sure it's not going to be a wasted journey. So always ask the question, is this the right place for me to be looking? And there are several ways that we can narrow that down. So you can search the online catalogues. The online catalogues vary, as I believe I said yesterday. Sometimes you have fantastic descriptions. Sometimes you will literally have a record that might have a keyword and then photographs, or a place name and then map and maybe a date, but sometimes not a date. And sometimes these things can be quite vague, particularly when you've got a very large amount of collection material that the archivists are trying to digitize over a period of time. So sometimes it is worth emailing and telephoning the repository, and sometimes it is even worth paying for a little bit of initial research collection to be done by the archivists. That is part of their job. Archives offer that. It's also a good way of them generating revenue. And as I said yesterday, along with the historic environment records, a lot of people don't know these services exist or don't use them. And so they are scrabbling around for funding. And, you know, it's a really important resource that would be a terrible shame to lose. So if you're going to spend however much money it would take to take a train to a place or to drive to a place, sometimes it is actually also just cheaper to ask somebody who's already there and who already knows the system to do the research for you. Cheaper, more efficient, and then you can decide whether or not it's something you want to pursue. I've certainly done this before with the aerial photographs down in Swindon. Do I want to go all the way down to Swindon to look at some photographs on the off chance they might have something to do with one of my sites? And the answer to that is normally a resounding no. So they are able to go through and check and provide me with an index list. They can also tell me which ones are digitized and can already be sent to me for a small fee, or I can ask for others to be digitized and sent over. Saves me time, and it also generates revenue for the archives. Most archives do not charge you to just go into the archive, but there will sometimes be fees associated with things like making copies, photographic licenses, search fees, that kind of thing. So opening times and arranging appointments. If you've gone through all of that and you've decided, yes, this archive is somewhere that I want to go and I definitely want to visit, do check what their current opening times are. Don't assume they're the same as last time, because they are often council run, and councils are often on a very tight budget at the moment. I've seen the archive opening hours shrink and change and be rearranged quite a lot with the local archives that I use over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Some of them do keep slightly strange hours. Some of them will do things like opening one Saturday in 4. Or, you know, the second Saturday of a month and things like that. So do check those carefully. And a good way, of course, is to get around accidentally trying to go when the archive isn't open. And I would always recommend that you do this, is to book in. They have readers tables within an archive, which are particularly important if you're going to be looking at large documents or maps. If you don't reserve one, there is no guarantee that you will be able to access that resource, and then you will have had a wasted trip. Some archives in non-COVID times offer very generous booking times, so you can book in for a whole morning, a whole afternoon, or a whole day if you think that's the amount of time you're going to need. With COVID, a lot of archives are saying you must book a slot. You can have 2 hours in the morning or 2 hours in the afternoon, because they have to clean everything down, obviously, between people, and it's a much more hygiene secure environment than it previously was. So another way that you can make your trip to the archive as efficient as possible is that you can, with most facilities, pre-order certain documents to be ready for you to view on collection. So all you need to do this is, when you're making your booking, once you've searched the online catalogue, there will be reference numbers on the online catalogue. And you will simply copy the details over onto an email or a booking form that's supplied on the website, or you can give them a call and talk to them over the phone if you prefer. They will then make a note of those and the time that you're planning to arrive, and they will have the documents ready for you on that day. The reason that they like doing this is it's more efficient for them. It means that they're not having to try and run around and get things out for people who are sitting there waiting for them. They can have them ready for when you arrive, so it frees up time for them to do other things. Also, it means that that you have got something to be getting on with and looking at, whilst you're also potentially looking through the catalogues or waiting for things you've ordered on the day to come through. Because invariably there are normally elements of all archive catalogues that have yet to be digitized and yet to be put into the online catalogue. So it's always useful to make as much use of the online resources before you go as you can. so that you can get those pre-orders in. Most places limit to 3 to 5 pre-orders or to having 3 documents out at any one time, but it does vary. Some places will only let you have 1, some will let you have an inordinate amount. It really varies. But it just means, again, that then you've got something in backup. Something else that the archives will often do is that they will often, when you put your orders in on the day for documents, they will go and collect them in groups, in bulks, and they'll normally do that on the hour or every half an hour. So if you're going to be sitting around waiting, then you can start looking through the stuff you've pre-ordered once you've put your orders in on the day. If you're really lucky, it could be that you have already, you know exactly what you want to look at. You've pre-ordered your stuff and you can have a really efficient archive trip. That's also a rare thing, but it does happen occasionally. And utilize your archivists. As I said previously, archivists can provide you with some free searches, some paid research, but they know the place they work better than anybody else. So if you have a question about whether or not, again, coming back to, is this archive right for you? I think that I want to search for this, but I can't seem to find it on the online catalogue. Just ask them questions. You know, these people are highly qualified. Most of them hold an archivist qualification, which is a completely separate degree level qualification. They are incredibly knowledgeable, and you know, they're there to be used and have that information be tapped. So please never be afraid if you're when you're in the archive or when you're arranging your visit, to go and call them up, send them an email, speak to them on the desk, ask them questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and I guarantee you, whatever you ask, they will have probably heard it before. And the amount of times that, you know, especially when you go to a lot of different archives, I find myself going up to the desk and go, look, I'm really sorry, but I just can't remember where you keep the index for X or Y. I don't know, parish registers or your OS map index, or you know, do you have the district council records for this part of the city, because I just can't seem to find them. And they can answer your question in seconds, whereas you could waste 30 minutes, an hour wandering around a room full of card indexes to absolutely no avail. So when you actually then come to visit the archive, travel light is my first top tip. If you've come by car, do think about leaving things in the car, and particularly lots of layers. The reason for this is that most archives have a sort of central meeting foyer with some nice chairs and a terrible coffee machine or something along those lines. But then when you actually go into the collections rooms, you will be going into a space where only certain items are permitted. And they normally have lockers in order for people to lock away items that are not permitted in the collections rooms. The problem is that these vary wildly in size and capacity. And also some do have some big lockers, but they often get filled up first. So you may be left with quite a small space. So my advice is, if you have a car, leave stuff in the car apart from your valuables, and don't, you know, it's inevitable. It does happen. I've had to do it when I've been working in London, but, you know, turning up with a suitcase is going to be problematic. So bring some ID. The reason for this is that most archives will have there's 2 ways they do this. So they used to have something called a reader's ticket, a CARN reader's ticket, CARN. But the last few times I've been to archives, which admittedly is something I do a lot less these days because I have a lovely couple of minions who go to archives for me, is that they don't seem to be using these as much. These reader's tickets, you used to take it to an archive the first time you went, you'd present them with proof of address and your ID, and they would write you out a little card that says this person is who they say they are, with your name and address on it, and you would keep that, and then every time you went to another archive, that would be your ID that you'd been registered on the system and they knew who you were. This is happening less now, so you often have to get a day pass or you have to sign up to individual archives. So bringing something with that proves who you are and has your address on it, like a driver's license, is particularly useful and is always worth doing, especially if you haven't been to that archive before. Because if you can't prove who you say you are, there is a chance they may not let you in to the collections rooms, because the collections are, well, they often do contain in their archives some valuable historic documents, and they want to be able to trace who has been there in case there's any damage to those documents. I mean, not that any of us would be going and vandalizing, you know, land title deeds from the 14th century or something, but they do need to be an element of accountability, and so it's very important to, if you've not been somewhere before, just make sure you've got some ID with you. I say cash because you probably wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of them still don't have the capacity to take payments on card. So, and I know that I'm personally, for me, I very rarely carry cash, even less because of the pandemic over the last year, but it is definitely worth having £20, between 10 and £20 in cash, and preferably some of it in change as well. That would make a lot of the archives very happy. They are slowly modernising, but certainly even 5 or 6 years ago, it was very rare to find an archive that would take card payments. The reason that you want the cash on you, I should just elaborate, is that you may wish to pay for something like a photo permit. So if you want to take your camera in with you, sometimes it's a lot easier to photograph documents than trying to scribble them down and copy and transcribe everything on the day. Also with historic maps, you can take some snaps, although they don't tend to allow you to take a tripod in. So then you have to get quite creative as to how you photograph in a dimly lit room something that's in a plastic wallet without a tripod. You get very creative with your photography. So often it is much easier to take a photograph than to copy, and it's also cheaper because it's normally a flat fee of between £5 and £10 to take an unlimited amount of photographs across your archive session. So there's certainly been plenty of historic documents and books where I've just snapped and snapped and snapped and then had a look at them later on my computer screen. Pencils and paper. Not all archives have many or any real number of plug sockets. So you can often take laptops and tablets and things in, but there is no guarantee that if your battery goes flat, you'll be able to charge them, or that there will be a charge point in or on or near your reader's table. So generally, I tend to stick with my camera and a notebook, just a bog standard black. This is my really boring work notebook, and also no pens. Everything has to be done in pencil. Bring a pencil sharpener. Some archives will sell pencils for sort of 30p, but I always take a couple. I'm a fan of the propelling pencils rather than the ones that you need to sharpen. But yes, you cannot use pens anywhere near historic documents for obvious reasons. Exploding biros, fountain pens could damage something that's, you know, survived the last 500 years but is now covered in your exploded ballpoint pen. So they just won't let you take those in. They will need to go in the locker. Don't rely on them having Wi-Fi as well. If you do take a laptop or a tablet and you've, say, got some modern maps that you thought, oh, I'll put that tablet there with a picture of the modern map or the aerial photograph, and I'll see if I can see it on the historic map I've got on the table. Download it before you go. I speak from personal experience. I've made that mistake. I made that mistake at the Historic England archives in Swindon, and had to go and find a cafe to download all the stuff onto my laptop before walking back and then looking at the aerial photographs next to my screen. It was quite embarrassing. So yeah, don't rely on them having, again, it's improving and slowly happening, but some of the archives, for example, the ones in Leicestershire, are housed in a very old former school building, and they are just, it's borderline not fit for purpose, but obviously it's been very expensive to get a new purpose-built building constructed, so that's where they live, and they don't have a lot of plug sockets, they don't have Wi-Fi, it's just the way it is. So. And as I mentioned before, really think about bringing a camera. It's cheaper and easier than making copies. You don't have to ask somebody else to do it for you. You pay a flat fee, and then generally what they do is they give you a sheet of paper and ask you to write down the accession numbers, or the reference numbers of all of the documents you've looked at and photographed, just the ones you photographed. If it's useless, you don't need to put it on there. And then you sign it at the end of the day saying, I promise that these are for research purposes only, and I will not reproduce these for any kind of commercial purpose without contacting the archive and finding out about copyright and reproduction restrictions. Often there is a small fee to reproduce those images for a report, but generally it's again, these small charges are all made because it's not cheap to curate these large collections of often documents that need to be kept in temperature controlled environments and acid free paper and archive boxes, etc. So that's where the charges come in. Okay, so quick task then. If Carol is able to pop people into groups of sort of 4 or 5, what I would like you to do is to pick any national or local archive, and you can go as crazy as you like. It doesn't have to be one that's got anything to do with the area that you live in. It can be based on any topic, and see if you can answer the 4 following questions. So when is the repository open? And in normal times, or because I know for the answer for all of them at the moment is going to be they're not, because they haven't reopened. They'll probably be reopening. I think it's middle of May. A lot of them are aiming for, in terms of people being able to visit them. Do you need to book in? And if so, how do you do that? Are there any charges associated with using the archives, making copies? Do they have anything about that on the website? And are there any special COVID restrictions currently in place limiting your use of these archives? So if we want to take about 15 minutes to do that, and then if you could all choose a spokesperson that's happy to feedback, that would be great, I think.
I just realised, Ruth, what you were talking about when you said about the other place. There's also the archive at Paxton House. That's the place we were talking about.
That's the yes. Country houses always a lot of them do keep their own. They have their own archivist. All sorts of places do. Aston Villa have their own archivist. I met the archivist for Aston Villa. A lot of football clubs, anywhere that might have a small in-house museum or generate a lot of memorabilia, you'd be amazed at all these different, and they're places that you can go and you can visit, and if they employ an archivist, then their job is to catalogue that and then help make it available for research. So yeah, you'd be surprised. A lot of football and rugby clubs and various things like that.
Demi, you'd be the expert on that kind of thing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, a lot of clubs have them. A lot of clubs are kind of taking more interest in it now. They all have their own historians. There's a number of Scottish clubs that are now setting up museums. They have we've organised the Scottish Football Heritage Network, so we can meet with all the historians who haven't done it in a while. So no, it's definitely something that's kind of more on clubs' minds now, I think, when they've got big anniversaries coming up, that kind of thing. Something I think they're trying to invest more time and money into.
Interesting.
Yeah, I find it's a lot of places, a lot of universities employ archivists and things like that for exactly that reason. Even big companies like the big financial companies in London and the banks will have their own archivists for big anniversaries and cataloguing the photographs and documents going all the way back into sort of the 19th century and further back. So yeah. We were group 1, and unfortunately I think Matt, because he was actually making notes, either that or looking at his phone, so I'm going to get him either way. So I'm going to nominate Matt to feedback on ours first.
So we thought we'd go a bit left field with our first choice of archive, which was good because we thought nobody else would have gone this. I'd be very surprised if they did. So we thought, Demi suggested that we look at Glasgow University Archive Services. We pretty much can't answer the first 3 questions for this one, but the last question, which are there any special COVID restrictions in place, is yes, they're closed, and any information other than they're closed and you can't go and visit. But we did manage to find some information. I suppose that is information in itself. They don't charge for basic enquiries, for basic facts and figures on their collection, but didn't have any further information on any further sort of in-depth research that they might be able to do. We saw that they were based across 3 different sites, and that it had information on what was available, which collections were available at each site. And we also found out that they're quite active on Twitter, and that looks like they're posting some quite interesting stuff from their manuscript collection. So, you know, do go and check out Glasgow University Museum Services if you're interested in an illustrated manuscript, which it looked like they were posting plenty of information about. So yes, that's we sort of didn't manage to find out too much information about that, but I suppose that's they're being very clear about the current position in terms of not being able to visit, which is good because that's not sending mixed messages about whether they're open or not. So we were left with about 5 minutes worth of time, so we thought we'd go a bit closer to home and look at Berwick Record Office as well. And we managed to find out that when in non-COVID circumstances, they're open Wednesdays and Thursdays between the hours of 9:30 to 1 and then 2 till 5. So getting a whole hour for their lunch break at Berwick Records Office. That's not bad, is it? You do need to register before you visit. They take part in the archive card scheme, one of them, and you don't need to take any ID with you. They've got very good information about what their fees are for things like photocopying, taking photographs yourself, etc., etc. And also, it seemed like all of the order forms for those things were also available online. And in terms of special COVID restrictions, they're closed, so you can't visit. That's pretty much what we managed to determine.
I feel that might be a running theme, but yes, some of them might. I thought some of them might have a lingering sort of details from the last time when lockdown restrictions were a little bit eased. But yes, I've been having a nosy around the Northumberland Archives website actually, and I am quite impressed by it. Got a lot of good information on there. So
volunteer because in spite of my good intentions yesterday, my internet collapsed and I had to stop. So I've been many times to the Edinburgh office, but we didn't cheat. We actually looked everything up. And the one in Edinburgh at the East End of Princess Street is open from 9 till 4:30 every day except Saturday and Sunday and public holidays. And they gave us a list of those. So Monday to Friday. We couldn't find any sign of having to book. And all of the times that I've been there, I've never had to book. So I think if it was a particularly busy time, you might be unlucky, but it's never been a problem. And what's really good about that is you can do research online before you go, and you can book to have things prepared for you, and you fill in a form and give the day that you're coming, the date that you want them. And you need 2 days if you email those requests and 1 day if it's a phone call. And I think you could have up to 12 items, which we thought was quite good. You have to have ID, which is a reader's ticket. And to get one of those, I think we thought it was a little bit OTT because you have to have 2 passport photographs, utilities bill, photographic ID, and I think that was it. and you get the reader's ticket. And they still use those every time you go in. And you also need to take £1 for the locker to put your stuff in. And I think that was it. We did look for the COVID details, and we ended up following a lead about a lot of COVID research and links to that. But we didn't see any banner headline that it's shut. But I do know that it is. So it's a bit of inside information, but we did try to be honest and looked it all up as well.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Heather. And that's a really fantastic example of why it's a good idea to check what you need before you go, particularly with the ID. And also, I mean, it's a bit like going to the swimming pool, isn't it? Turning up without a pound coin for your locker. But yeah, the ID side of things, especially if you travelled a long way, to then be told, oh no, sorry, if you don't have these things, you can't actually come in because we can't verify who you are. Extremely disappointing and awkward situations. So, and certainly something nobody told me before the first time I went to an archive office, although luckily it wasn't too much of an issue at that point. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Heather. That was really grand. Who?
Perhaps I will. So we started off quite locally. We thought we'd look up Paxton archives just to see if there's any information on there. And we found a little bit out, but to be honest, it's quite a brief website. I think that's just because it's probably quite a small organisation anyway. So we had a little look on to see what details there were of their collection, and we did find out that they said they've got about 1,800 items in their archive, but it didn't have any details of that being open pre-COVID or now, but I know that Paxton House is shut, or when they're going to reopen. So we had a little look for the contact, because we thought the best way of getting a bit of information was probably to get in touch with the archivist there in the future if we need to access inside those records. And we couldn't find anything for the archivist particularly, but there was a general inquiry form, and we thought that perhaps that might be the best way forward if we needed to get in touch with them in the future to see if they've got anything relevant to the project, which I've know from previously that they do. So there's that. And then we thought, well, with the remaining time, because we'd blitzed that in about 5 minutes flat, we thought we'd have a look on the National Library of Scotland website, just to have a little look what the process is around that. And it looks like you need to get some sort of library card sorted out, a little bit like the Edinburgh archive that Heather's just described. You need to get yourself hooked up with a library card in order to access that. But then once you've gone through the rigmarole and you need your ID and what have you for that, then you can access that when it's open again. And I think, Susan, did you write down the opening times? What was the opening times again? Was it 9 to 5?
Well, it's 10 to 1600 Monday to Friday in general. And then it's not opening till the 27th of April for COVID, after COVID, not after. And there will be a limited reading room available at that point. Yeah, and that's... We couldn't find anything about charges though, could we? There seemed to be a lot of paperwork involved in getting in there, but then we couldn't see anything about charges, but we just may not have hit the right button.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of sort of, not blocks on the pages, but they redirected to their COVID page quite a bit.
Yeah,
which was just a standard, we're closed because of COVID, blah blah blah. So we ended up on the COVID page quite a few times, I think, didn't we? Really.
All right, that's brilliant. Yes, it is an unfortunate side effect sometimes of, especially my job, is that I do have a wallet full of a variety of readers' tickets, library cards, and various other things, and it is sort of like like a little deck of cards sometimes that you need to go through for the various different local authorities. So yes, it would be so much more useful if there was just a nationwide, even an app that you could have your details in or something, but we haven't quite caught up with that, unfortunately, yet. So that was grand. Yes, I think the COVID, that the noises that we're getting through work is that the archives are certainly reopening for having their staff in around now. Where things are now opening up because we have to do an archive search for every reporter standard unless there's a really good reason, i.e. they're closed. Even when there are fantastic resources available online, we still have to, for due diligence, check because all the catalogues aren't online. So yes, they're kind of getting in contact and saying we're taking search requests again, but I don't know how many of them are actually letting humans in at the moment. So yeah, I'm not quite sure when that will kick off again. And then group 4, was that the last group?
George, I think.
Okay.
So we did quite a local ones. We did Tyne and Weir archives. So like the others, they're not currently open at the moment, but Wessex and Google just still had the old opening times on. Well, I think it was. So they're open every day of the week, including Sunday. So usually it was 10 to 4 p.m. Weekends, 11 to 4 p.m. And then for booking, there's going to be a new booking system when they open, but they haven't really said much about what it would be yet. I'm not sure if beforehand, if you could just go in at any time you wanted. But I wonder if it may, I'm not sure if the booking system may only just be for a month until June the 21st, hopefully, where they'll probably revert back to how it was, hopefully. If you want a photo license, it would be £10. And then when I was looking at photocopying, it seems like it varies upon the size of the document, what kind of document it is, the format of the document, because I guess in some are more fiddly to do. And then to send the rest of it just seems to be kind of up in the air, changing stuff of how things currently are.
Okay,
is anyone from my group or anything?
I think that was everything. Yeah. It's good.
Fantastic stuff. I'm really glad everybody's gone and looked at different things as well, which has worked out really well. Fantastic.
I found out something very, very Croydon. I went and Matt's and Becky are going to roll their eyes now. I had a look at the Samuel Coleridge Taylor archive in Croydon. He's the first sort of famous classical composer of Black African heritage, and he was from Croydon. And it's 15p to photocopy anything there, George. So there you are. Anything is 15p, but camera use is free. Yeah, they had some slightly random opening hours. So Wednesday to Saturday, 10:30 till 5, except Tuesday morning they're open. Tuesday they're only open in the afternoon, which probably has something to do with Croydon's old market day. And they do postcards of things and for 25p, which, thinking about what they've got in their art collection, they've got a whole of Bridget Riley's and stuff that no one knows about in Croydon Art Gallery, and they're not on display half the time. They're in the research room. So that's sorted me out for birthday cards for the next.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. I mean, I think just to talk about the photocopying charges, when we were looking at it was the Berwick one that when we were looking at the charges for Northumberland archives, it's £3 for a day photo permit, or 50p for the cheapest photocopy. So you can see why, if you just want reference, take a camera and just take as many, because you can take as many photographs as you like. You can photograph every page in the book. You know, it's also, you know, better for the planet, to be honest. Yes. So you know, it just makes so much more sense as an economy of scale to just take the photographs, and then if you really do need a physical copy of something for a reason later on. But I mean, with everything being produced digitally these days anyway, it's much easier to just go with taking a camera if you've got access to a reasonable camera. The only issue, as I said before, is that you can't take a tripod, and it can you get pretty good at doing the strap around the neck kind of extended tripod at various different angles. You also learn that whoever set up the autofocus settings on Nikons, in my experience, did not ever try them in a dark room with reflective surfaces. So most of what I know about manual setting photography is to do with how to make a map visible on a photo in a kind of weirdly lit room, normally with terrible strip lighting down the ceiling, so there's just a line that reflects all the way down the document. But yeah, it is generally photos are the way to go. Take your camera.
Sorry, could I just ask you, sorry to interrupt, Ruth, are you
allowed
to bring in your phone to take photographs? You're not allowed to bring in a phone, are you?
Yes, in theory, some of them will allow you to take your phone in. If it should be fine, particularly if you've got, you know, this is my work phone, it's an iPhone. I am constantly astonished at the camera quality on this. So some of them will and some of them won't. It depends on the archive. But yes, if they do, then you can, so long as you fill out a photo permit. The main reason they used to say you couldn't was because it's really easy for them to see if you're taking photos using a camera. It's a lot harder for them to tell if people are sneaking photos using using their phone. But yes, some of them have caught up with that. You just need to declare it and say, this is why I've got my phone out and this is what I'm doing.
Thanks.
Actually, the Croydon place has a very nice document saying, "Are you new to archives?" So I will actually post the link for everyone, because it's just really interesting, and it tells you about actually how to behave with pieces of paper in your hand, which is really, really clear. So I don't know if that's just saying something about what people in Croydon are like about taking burgers into archives. I don't know. I will post that in the chat.
So actually, I'm just going to share my screen and just quickly move on to the last little bit of me talking before we go and grab a bit of refreshment. I know I'm certainly a little bit croaky today after talking at you all yesterday. So I'll just quickly share this again now. Share, and then I'll get that, start that slideshow again. Go on. There we go. So you'd think it would start back from where you left it, but no. There we go. So with regards to hand documents, as I was just saying, when you get into the archives, so I just thought I would quickly give you a summary of what you might find in a local archive. And I did this largely off the top of my head, I must confess. I did a few quick searches on the odd online search. And what you will largely find are, as I said before, you've got your local estate collections or local business collections, things that have basically, often someone's had a clear out, or a business might have gone under, or it's been sold over a period, and they've sort of turned up and gone, do you want this? Here's a box of stuff. We don't want it anymore. And that's how a lot of this stuff does actually end up. People pass away, their children find enormous boxes of early 20th century photographs of the city and things like that. And so that is why often you get these boxes of photos or boxes of documents where they've sort of distilled them down into smaller parts of the whole on certain topics or of a certain date. But if you order it, what you will actually get is a box, and you will have to go through and look at all the things in that box, because the thing that has been accessed to their collection is the box, and the thing that has the catalogue number is the whole box. And certainly I spent some time not so long ago at Manchester Archives getting just taking pieces of paper out and going, nope, put it back in, nope. And they were all land auction deeds, and I was looking for one, but the box was about this thick. It took me quite a long time to find the one that I was looking for, but that is just the nature of archival research. If they'd had to catalogue and access every single one of those individually to the collection, it's just not even worth thinking about. I don't think you'd feel like carrying on with your life up until you got halfway through. So legal notices and licenses. One of the favourite things that I always like looking for when I'm doing urban research is publican licensing. You get all of your the licensing to sell alcohol, making something's a public house, a licensed premises, and those will go back to the early to mid 19th century. And a bit like field names, pub names are really interesting if you're a total nerd like me. And pub names change, and they cycle around different properties in the same villages, and they have often local significance or significance to the person that originally set up the public house. There's all sorts of fun things you can go down with that. Deeds of sale, auction, land auction, conveyancing documents. Some are more interesting than others. The older they get, the bigger and grander and the more seals you get along the bottom, big wax seals. And very rarely are any of those actually useful to what I do, but there's always a great sense of satisfaction when the archivist brings out a massive tube or an enormous box that contains something written on vellum or some kind of incredible paper. Local council records, a lot of those go automatically into the local archive. Same with parish records, graveyard. Some of them are kept with the churches. Some of them individual churches. Some of the parish records will end up with the local archive, depending on how far back you're going. Photographs, wills, and also local laws and bylaws. I was actually having a nosy round Northumberland. They've got a lot of local laws and bylaws going on around there. I presume that's because they consistently were being tossed between one system and another for quite a long time as well. So they've sort of come up with their own framework. With all of these, I was just going to quickly add before we go for tea, when you get into the archives, you've gone through, you've got your reader's ticket, you put your stuff in the locker, you've got your pencil, you get the reading room, you sit down at your table, you will see funny little discs, long sets of beads, long, sometimes leather or soft material covered sort of snakes, look a bit like draft excluders. All of these things are props to help you manage and not damage the documents whilst you're looking at them. And I would say to you about this the same as I say about any specific research query. If you ask for a document and it comes out and you go, oh my God, what am I going to do with that? Ask the archivists. if you're looking at this thing and it's folded like 50 times and every single seam, every single crease looks like it's about to fall off, ask someone and they will explain how to use the weights and the beads and the amazing pieces of foam that are all cut to different depths for you to rest things in so that the spine isn't overly extended and breaks. They have all sorts of gadgets and gizmos and they are trained and will be able to help you. So rather than me going into a great amount of detail about that, I found that also if you look in fear at a document when it's given to you, they tend to pick up that you need a hand, will often suggest an arrangement of how to weight something down without causing it any damage. If they were really delicate, they wouldn't necessarily, or they were really important, they wouldn't necessarily allow you to handle it. So don't worry too much if they sustain tiny little tears or tiny, this happens. Often you will be the only person that's asked to look at that for 10, 15, 20 years as well, because they have huge collections in some of these places. So don't worry too much. But yes, if you're not sure how to handle it, just ask. They would much rather you ask than tried and got it wrong. So on that note, if anyone has any other quick questions, if not, we could all go and grab some tea. I think